It's the Blue Collar Breakdown! Welcome to the Blue Collar Breakdown! Starting right now!
Hello, and welcome to the Blue Collar Breakdown. I'm Tom Eddlem, the Blue Collar Economist. Today, we're going to talk about, do low interest rates stimulate? Do they really stimulate the economy? Or do they chase capital abroad and seeking higher returns? Well, let me tell you, I never ran across anyone who said, well, son, I really wouldn't like to loan you any money, but if you lower your interest rate that I'm willing to get back, if you lower the profit I'm willing to get from the loan, then maybe I'll loan you some money. I've never heard that. Have you ever heard that? I never heard that. So why do people think that interest rates lower or stimulate the economy, stimulate more borrowing? I don't know. So what I did was I wrote a piece for the Libertarian Institute, published on Tuesday. Do lower interest rates really have the stimulus? Lower interest rates do not have the stimulus the economy craves, because they don't. Now, I gave people the benefit of the doubt. I gave them the benefit of the doubt, and I said, okay, let's see if I can do some data looking and see if I can find any evidence that interest rates do stimulate the economy. For example, let's go to the Federal Reserve, okay? The Federal Reserve Bank is the board that raises or lowers interest rates. At least that's what they don't mandate interest rates, but they do have a heavy influence on interest rates. And here's what their website says. Lower interest rates, for example, often encourage more people to obtain a mortgage for a home or to borrow money for an automobile or home improvements, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's great. That's great. That means we're building more houses and selling more cars and all of those things. Because when interest rates get low, that's great. What's the evidence for it? Let's look at the housing numbers over the last 50 years. Because in 2000, they lowered interest rates nearly to zero, and they kept them there for 23 years. And look, these are raw numbers here in the chart. Keep in mind, these are raw numbers, okay? There were more houses built in the 1970s than there were in even the housing boom era of the early 2000s. Why is that? And these are raw numbers, okay? Keep in mind, in the 1970s, we had 200 million people, and the population was increasing at 0.5% per year. In 2006, we had 300 million people, and the population was increasing at 0.5% per year. So what does that amount to? Well, in 0.5% in 200 million people is we're getting another million people every year. But in 2006, 0.5% of 300 million people is we're getting another 1.5 million people a year. So we're building fewer houses, even though we're having more new people. And by the way, the household size has decreased. So why is it not building more houses? The Federal Reserve says, oh, well, people are more likely to buy a house. Well, how are they more likely to buy a house if all the houses that exist are already bought and they're not building any more? How does that work? Okay, so here's what I did. I said, all right, that's just one part of the economy. That's just, housing is just a segment of the economy. What if I looked at the whole economy? Maybe it stimulates the whole economy. Let's look at GDP. All right. Does it stimulate GDP? Now, that's going to be tough to do. But what I did was I went to the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, not physically. I didn't fly there, but I went to their website. They have all kinds of information on interest rates going back many years. And I just pulled some I pulled some numbers from the G8 and from the Eurozone. And I threw out all the non-advanced countries. So in the G8, for example, you've got advanced countries like Japan and Germany and the United States and France and Britain. And it also has Russia and China. And I didn't include that in my data. Same thing with the Eurozone. Yeah, sure. I kept Belgium and the Netherlands and the Czech Republic, but I threw out Moldavia and Bosnia and countries that just haven't kept up. Okay. So I've got 21 countries and I've got all the data of their interest rates from 1990 all the way up to 2005. Then I went to the World Economic, what is it? It's the WEO of the International Monetary Fund, and they have a database of all the GDP numbers. And while I was there, I grabbed not just GDP numbers, I grabbed inflation numbers, I grabbed investment numbers, I grabbed a whole bunch for all of these 21 countries, and I pulled them and I mashed it with the numbers I got from the Bank of International Settlements on interest rates. And I said, okay, let's run a regression. Let's run a computer simulation. I use Python, but you could use any other public source or even paid source if you prefer R, or if you use Stata, or if you could even probably do this in Excel. But you grab this data and then you say, okay, what I did was I ran a scatter graph and I said to the computer, draw a line and give me the numbers, the probability that this would increase or decrease the interest rate would increase or decrease the GDP numbers. And here's what I got. All right, here's the first one. And by the way, you can see if you're listening, you don't see it, but if you're looking, I put two charts in, okay? Because one of the objections that I ran into when I was discussing it on Facebook, and I think it's a legitimate objection, is what you're doing is you're mixing cause and effect. Because what happens when a country goes into recession? Well, the central bank lowers the interest rate. So of course, it's going to show that lower interest rates during the recession, and it's going to say, "Gee, lower interest rates are really hurting the economy." But it's the goal is to use the low interest rates to stimulate the economy. Okay, so what I did was I took the first year of negative GDP growth for any country. I mean, first sequential year. So if you had 2 years in a row, I just took the first year. And I pulled that out and put it in a separate chart. And that's the one, if you're watching the podcast, that's the one in red to the left, okay? And the one to the right in blue is all of the other years for all of the 23 countries. And you can see both lines are going up. And what that means is the higher the interest rate, the higher the economic growth. And I also asked the computer, hey, why don't you give me the p-value? The p-value basically tells you what's the probability that, it's the line's going up. Okay. That means higher growth and higher interest rates are correlated. What are the odds that we got it wrong? Okay. And generally what you're looking for is 95% probability that you're right. Okay, so if the p-value is 0.05 or lower, the computer says, yeah, you're pretty sure these are correlated, and you're not going to get the reverse. That this is not the problem. And what you see in the blue chart with in the non-first year of recession is that the computer is 96 point something percent sure. No. Higher interest rates mean higher growth, and lower interest rates mean lower growth. I'm 96% sure. Okay, and on the red, it said, well, I'm only 40% sure. that higher interest rates mean higher growth for those in already, in the recession, all right, in the red chart. So basically the computer said, I don't know about that. I can't tell one way or the other. I mean, if you look at the data, it says the higher the interest rate, the better, the lower, the less severe the recession, but can't really tell. Okay. So the next objection you might get to, the person like me who is skeptical of it, I might say, okay, well, I got you now, haha. But then you might come back and say, well, wait a minute. There's a lot of data. If you look at the charts, okay, especially the blue one on the right, where there's a lot of data on the zero level or negative level, and it doesn't seem to be correlated. It's just like it's not. It doesn't look right. And if you said that, you'd be right. Yeah. Another time someone else might say, well, wait a minute. This includes all the data from 1990 to 2025. And I say, yes. Well, what about the COVID years? The COVID years, 2020, 21, what did they do? All they did was they shut down the economy and they lowered the interest rates. I mean, of course they're going to show really bad. I mean, that's going to really make low interest rates look bad, even though it had nothing to do with stimulating the economy, because they lowered interest rates to kind of stimulate the economy a little bit for the essential workers and stuff. But the goal was to shut down the economy so that we could have this. Didn't work, but I mean, but the goal was to get non-essentials to not work and to stop spreading the virus and all the rest. So the point is, it's not about COVID. It's about, the data. The data is kind of messed up by those years, 2020 and 2021, because you have all of this, what arguably could be called false signals, where the interest rates are low and the economic growth is low or negative, and it's no fault of interest rates. Interest rates might be saving it from being a lot lower. So what I did was I did another chart taking 2020 and 2021 out. Okay, so that's my chart 2. And it looks just like the other one, but you can see there's a lot less of the float all around the bottom there, all around the zero. And what happens is the computer is even more sure that, hey, this one is, if you look at the p-value, it says I'm 99.99% sure that, hey, the higher the interest rate, the higher the growth. The lower the interest rate, the lower the growth. And not only that, if the computer says, when I said it before, there's a little figure in there called the R squared. I only saw that the interest rates explain 1% of the variance, because you've got all of these data pieces going back and forth all over the place. And some of that is explained by interest rates, but not a lot of it. But in this one, he says, oh, it's more than 3%. This is more than 3 times. This explains more than 3% of the data. And on the other side, you've got the recession years. And in this case, the computer basically says, look, I still see a higher, the higher the interest rate, the better the economy, but I still don't get it. I mean, the p-value, I think, is like 0.0. 0.3, it says, well, this instead of being only 40%, now I'm like, 64% sure. I don't know. Or 68% sure. I still don't know. All right. But with the blue, I know. With the you take out the COVID, I know. Okay. Now at this point, you might be saying, okay, hold on a second here. You're using nominal interest rates, Eddlem. The sticker rate of interest rates, that's not the real rate of interest. Everybody knows that. If you have an interest rate of 2.5% on your mortgage in 2022, when the inflation rate is 8%, you're getting mortgage forgiveness, dude. And that's not the real rate. Your real rate is negative. Okay. So what you have to do is do the real interest rate, which is the sticker price minus the inflation rate. If you measure that, if you measure that rate, then you're going to see stimulus, okay? Because it really doesn't matter. You're letting inflation mess everything up. So what I did was I did a third chart and I said, okay, let's not measure the nominal interest rate. Let's measure the real interest rate. Again, taking out the COVID years, putting them into two separate charts. And here's what I got. Okay. The computer actually is a little bit less sure that this time with the blue chart. If you look at the blue, it says, well, I'm still 99.9% sure, but I'm not 99.99% sure that higher interest rates mean higher growth and lower interest rates mean lower growth. So it's a little bit less sure. And it also says that explains a little bit less of the data. All right. The R squared value is only 1 point something percent. So it's, it doesn't really explain as much. And you can see here with the recession years, the chart goes maybe not pear-shaped, but there's a slant downward. But once again, for the third time, the recession years, the computer says, look, I see lower interest rates and higher growth, but I can't tell you for sure. I'm only 91% sure that helps. Maybe it does. I don't know. But that doesn't really show any growth. It doesn't show any growth with low interest rates. So at this point, you might be saying, okay, Eddlem, okay. Look, let's look at a whole bunch of variables. I mean, you yourself have said that these charts looking at interest rates only explain 1 or 2% of the variance in all of these economic growth levels. And maybe if we throw in a whole bunch of different variables, we'll get that growth because we can account for sort of those counterintuitive or the countervailing variables that throw us off. I mean, you picked one out called COVID, and it didn't go the way I thought it would go. But hey, Eddlem, you should throw in a whole bunch of variables. So that's what I did for the Libertarian Institute piece, and I came up with this multivariate regression. And I included country and the year it was in because some years like 2008 were terrible. But I also pulled out the COVID years. And here's what I got. Okay. I did two charts. I did one for the immediate year and one for the next year, because you might argue, okay, well, maybe lower interest rates don't take effect right away. Like maybe you lower interest rates and it takes a while for the interest rates to go down and people to invest. Maybe it takes a year. So I did regular and 1 year lag. And here's what I got. Okay. Again, I'm looking at the different variables. I got the nominal interest rate and it's all negative. Okay. I got the real interest rate, which actually is a little bit positive for the immediate year, but negative for the following year. I put investment in there, the investment rate using the IMF numbers. I put the inflation rate in there. I put interest rate change in a year. So let's say the interest rate's 12%. What if they just take it down to 11? I mean, that should stimulate, shouldn't it? So I did that one. That one was also negative. And the only place where you could theoretically have a positive is the real interest rate in the first year. It's just like there's just no evidence that there's any stimulus. That's what I came up with. Now I do find that there are ways to find stimulus. If you look at national savings rates, well, the more you save, the more you grow. This chart here shows the low savings countries grow at the slowest rate, only 1.4 or 3.4% per year. The higher quintile things, you can't really see it, but it's almost 5% per year. So you get almost a full percentage point of growth every year. By the way, these numbers, these international dollars numbers, they tend to inflate the the real growth. I mean, if compared to, say, our CPI numbers, like when the U.S. government announces GDP growth, they measure it against the CPI, not against what's called an inflation, a GDP deflator number, which is like a lower level of it tends to undercount inflation and therefore overcount economic growth. But nonetheless, I mean, it's the same distortion everywhere. So higher savings means higher growth. And well, you get to this point and you say, okay, why lie? Why do this? Why, if there's no data, and there never was any data, and there isn't, that interest rates stimulate, well, why do they keep saying that? Well, one, I think one of the big reasons they do it is it preserves the public impression that the Federal Reserve has the power to save the economy. Now, by doing that, they are ruining the economy just a little bit. If you look at the chart here, okay, this chart shows positive and negative GDP growth, but if you look at the numbers at the bottom, it shows very small changes. What impact upon GDP increase or decrease? Plus or minus 0.05%. That's very, very tiny. Okay, it's very tiny. But so they are ruining the economy. But if the Fed comes in and says, oh, we're going to use both barrels of our shotgun and we're going to cut the interest rate, it gives people the confidence, and it's sort of a PR thing for the Federal Reserve. So that's one reason. I think that's the smaller of the two, but it is a reason. The second reason, which is not insubstantial, is this. It is that low interest rates help the federal government when they're borrowing, where the federal government's $32 trillion in debt. If they lower the interest rate, well, what they do is lower the ability of the federal government to borrow, and that lowers the deficit because the payment on the national debt is now over $1.1 trillion. $1.1 trillion every year. So if they lower the interest rate, they can lower that payment substantially. And that this might be, if Trump were smart, and Trump has said, oh, no, just out no inflation. This was a few months ago. It was back in September. Too late. And he calls Jerome Powell too late. Too late, must lower the rate big right now. If Trump were smart, that's what he would be thinking about. He'd be thinking about, well, gee, if I want to leave the White House and not have a huge deficit, maybe I'll get the federal government to lower interest rates and the payments on the debt will be lower and that'll lower the deficits. I don't think that's the way he's thinking. I think he's thinking superficially that this will stimulate the economy. But that's it. The third and last reason I think that interest rates get lowered, and they say that interest rates stimulate the economy. And there's actually research behind this. There's a Nobel Prize winner in economics named James Tobin who did research on this back in, I want to say it was the 70s, but it might have been earlier than that. And one of the things he found was that lower interest rates tends to increase the value of assets like corporate valuations, real estate, those type of things. And billionaires love that, right? I mean, if the people with all the stuff love it when the prices of all their stuff goes up. And we see that with housing. One of the things that happened with when the interest rate went down, housing prices kept going up and up and up and up and up. And now they're starting to come down because interest rates are a little bit higher, right? The interest rates, for a while, the Fed had the interest rate at over 4%, and that meant that interest rates for mortgages were in the 6s and 7s. Now they're lowering interest rates, and the interest rates for mortgages are starting to come down a little bit, but the prices are starting to come down as well, the sticker prices. It's because, hey, nobody can afford a payment. So if the interest rate's high, the sticker prices have to come down. And it was the same thing in reverse back in the early 2000s. The interest rate was so low, nobody really cared what the sticker price was. Hey, I can afford this payment. I'll pay it off in 30 years. Hey, whatever. Well, what happens was the asset prices more than doubled over and above inflation, or not more than doubled, but came pretty close to doubling over and above inflation. And billionaires loved that. And I think I've gone over this in past podcasts, but let's say you're a billionaire in 2000 and you're a real estate developer. Well, if you want to optimally invest all of your money in real estate, you want 20% equity and you want to mortgage 80% because you don't want to pay that PMI as you guys who own houses know. So what he does is, with his $1 billion, he buys $5 billion worth of property, and he's got $4 billion worth of mortgage notes, and he's got $1 billion worth of equity in his various properties, and his tenants pay the mortgage, and it makes a little profit that way. And inflation pays off his mortgage, right? If it's 3% inflation on $4 billion worth of mortgages, well, that's like a check for $120 million every year. That's great. But what if the valuation of his properties, his $5 billion worth of properties by 2022 doubles? Well, now he's not just a $1 billionaire, he's a $6 billionaire, because his $5 billion of properties have gone up to $10 billion, but he still has the same $4 billion in debt, right? He still has the same mortgages. They're not paid off yet. So now he's a $6 billionaire just by that one trick of the Federal Reserve. Well, also by inflation. And so he re-optimizes. He's got $6 billion. He buys $30 billion worth of property. He's got 20% equity. He's got $24 billion worth of notes. And look, inflation is up to 8% in 2022. Oh, what do you know? He got $2 billion worth of mortgage forgiveness that year. The billionaires love that. I think that's the main reason why they lower interest rates. It has nothing to do with stimulation. It doesn't make housing more affordable. It just makes it more impossible to pay off. You're stuck in paying off this absurdly priced real estate for 30 years. I mean, if you have a high interest rate, you could pay it off early. If you get a few extra bucks, you can throw it on the mortgage and not pay the interest, and you'll pay less over time than you would with the same payment for a house that's valued higher at a lower interest rate. They want to stick you on the line. The regular working people, they want to stick you on the line. And that's I think, why low interest rates are sold as stimulating the economy, because they do stimulate the billionaires' economy. They just don't stimulate young people looking for a house. They don't stimulate young people trying to buy a car. It doesn't do anything that way. So that's why they sell it that way. That's my view. Anyway, that's it for the podcast. I want you to join in Blue Collar Breakdown next week. I will be going live again. I think I'm going to interview one of my friends, Sean Kennedy, who's the head of the American Liberty Caucus of the Libertarian Party. And I will I'll also look at the Libertarian Institute. I got another article coming out maybe next week or the week after. It's already in the bag. I told them, run it, whatever you want. So keep looking at the Libertarian Institute for that and all the other great stuff they have at the Libertarian Institute. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, buy me a coffee, all that stuff. Thank you. See you next week.
The